had a quick discussion about how we can clear the local storage and how we can check if something's still there. I'm doing that for the benefit of the recording. Moving on, we can sign in. Okay, so what should happen? When should we store the username in the local storage? After we change, right? When we're doing the adding the username to state, maybe we could also put it in local storage. So it's going to be as easy as, because I already kind of plugged these things in. I can do sign in, and signing in can also say like local storage set item username to username. Does that make sense? Yeah. It's a global object. You can use it like fetch, like document.
JavaScript or
JavaScript. Not even JavaScript, it's the browser and JavaScript. Because if you use something like Node.js in the backend, you don't have local storage because it's not in the browser. So it's literally, this is here because the browser can do that. Okay, so let's see what that does. And what should happen when we sign out? Yeah, I could clear it. What's the danger of doing that? What if we store other stuff that we don't want to remove, right? So what I can do is remove item. I can't type username today. So let's see if that works. So I'm going to check. I'm going to start my app. Let's say we start with an empty local storage. It's empty. I'm going to sign in. We have Nicholas. I'm going to refresh. We're still signed out, but Nicholas is still there. I'm going to sign in. I'm going to press sign out. The username's gone. So now we are able to store, right? Only when we get a valid user, we can put them in local storage. That's good. But still, we're missing a little bit of functionality that says, well, if we had a valid user, I'm still asking you to sign in though. So what do I have to do? Well, in app, maybe, when app mounts, right? That means when I refresh the page, it will mount again. That's a good time. We can now say, hey, check if we have a local storage username. And if we do, sign them in. And so we can say component did mount. And I can say if local storage username, actually let's put it local storage get item username, right? So that's either going to be the username or null. So now we can check if username, we can say this dot sign in and pass it the username. Let's check. That's good. Maybe I also want to push them, not push state, push to inventory. To do that, we need desktop props. Let's see if that works. Yay. Right, so what's happening now is we have a username. Therefore, I don't need to show you a sign-in page. You're already signed in. When you sign out, even if you wanted to go to the inventory, well, that's a page not found, but the actual inventory would just route you back to the sign-in page. When I sign in, I'm back in. When I refresh the page, I'm still there. You asked a very good question. What was that?
If you go to the console and manually
right? Before, app state was nah, but local storage is always available, even in production mode. So what can people do? Well, they can say set item username couple of issues. First, anyone can sign in, right? They can just add a username to local storage, and now they have access to our application. Second, that username that they add doesn't even have to be valid, right? Do we have a user wololo in our API, in our backend? No, we don't. So that's pretty bad. So the last thing I want to do before we finish is maybe add a new bit of functionality to my app. So far, we've been able to authenticate the user, and authenticating the user has meant the user has to type in the username and password. Well, maybe that's not what we want anymore. Maybe, I mean, we want that, but maybe we also want to find a way to validate if a username is valid or not. That's a good first step. So what that means is on my server and my routes, where are my routes? There we are. I need to have a new method that I can call. And I'm going to make it a GET request, and I'm going to call it validate, and it's going to be validate. So it's just a custom route that I wrote. What that means is I can now go into my users controller. I can define validate, right? And this will be called whenever we make a GET request. Okay. So what can we do? We can say user is user find by, let's say I'm going to be passing a username. Now I'm going to do something slightly different though, because I'm making a GET request. I won't have params. I won't be passing stuff in the params. Instead, what I can do is I can pass, you know when you do this, you know you have headers? Headers right now, so far we've only seen that we can add content type, but we can add any kind of header we want. We can add anything custom in there. Because we're making a GET request, we don't have access to a body. We don't need to write to post because this is a GET request, but what's going to happen is we can add more headers. And we can say and the value of this can be maybe the username from the local storage. So what's going to happen? Let's see if I do that. I'm going to get an error because the stuff is not ready yet, but if I check the network, you can see I made a request to sign in. And you can see that I now passed a new header called authorization. It's currently null because we have no user in there. But if I sign in and if I try that again, still not going to work, but in the network, I'm passing that in there. So I can make a GET request and still send some information over. And the way to get that is request, headers, and then the name of the header. So I'm passing in authorization, I think. So let's see if that works. I can put a bybug. Okay. So that should be working when I make a GET request, but I need to make it to a new endpoint I created called validate. So let's see what happens. Okay, it's pending. That's promising. Let's open the console. Yeah, so first of all, you notice we triggered the bybug. That means we made a good request. It was expecting a GET request. We made a GET request. So now we're here. Let me check request. Yeah, It's a very tiny object. It has headers, which is also a very tiny object. And headers has authorization. Authorization, which is Nicholas, right? The only reason it has this is because we passed that custom authorization. So in the headers now we can check all the different kinds of stuff. So for example, another header we were passing is content type, right? So we can check that. So that's how the server can handle the headers. What that means for us though, cool, is that we can do here, try to find the user by that username. Let's say to validate, we don't need a password yet, so I'm going to say, I'm just going to check if the user came back. And if the user came back, I'm going to say render the username and ID. Otherwise, render an error. So same as before. Quite similar. Oh, I need to get rid of the by bug. I did get rid of the by bug. It's just pending object. Okay, it worked. In local storage, we have Nicholas. So we're checking if Nicholas is valid, and then we're saying, yeah, that's valid. That's kind of protecting me already because it means someone else cannot just come and say, wololo, try this again. Now they're unauthorized. That user doesn't exist. So it doesn't get us the whole way there yet. We'll see how we get there, but this is already an improvement. And what we can do is, I can grab this code. I can go back to my little API that I wrote, and I can say, I can create a new method called validate. And to be fair, validate doesn't need to have any arguments because we can get everything we want from the local storage. So I don't need, I'm not even going to have to pass in any arguments here. I'm just going to say validate like this. Should work exactly the same way we've done it, and return that fetch. So we're going to get back a user if it's valid, and we're going to get back an error if it's invalid. When do we do that? Well, right now this is not very secure because if we have a username, we're signing in the username straight away, even if it's not a valid one. So I'm going to make that a little bit better by saying API. Do we have an API here? No. Now we do. Let's validate. Let's see if we have a valid user. Then we get back some data like before, and we can say if the data has an error, I guess we can call sign out. Right? Sign out is just going to remove the local storage name, and it's going to remove any state there if we have it. Otherwise, we have a valid user. Now we can do this. And the username is going to be the one we get back from the server. And we're going to push them back to inventory. So I can get rid of that condition there. And let's see if we get this working. Yeah. You see that currently we had the, I think, wololo in there. It got cleared because it was invalid, so we signed out. We cleared that sort of local storage. If we sign in now, though, yeah, that's working. And if I refresh the page, that's still working. But you can see the only reason I was signed back in was because we made a request to validate, and we got back a valid user. Still not great, a little bit better. So at least someone can just like use any user to get access. They need to know a valid username, but it's still a bit flimsy. So now if I do this, for example, set item username to whatever, and I try to refresh the page, we have a way to actually check in on the server that this is a valid user or not. And if it's not a valid user, sorry, you don't have access. I'm going to end it there. This is part 1. In the afternoon, we do part 2, and we're going to take it all the way there, hopefully. During the break. During the break, have you seen we've deployed some Auth lab? That's mainly like a README with a lot of info. If you read it, it should make more sense now than if you tried to read it before. I would say try to implement it if you want, but at least think about it. So when we come back, we can do the last bit, and it will make more sense. It's a great idea if you want to try to implement something like this as a stretch goal in your applications, for example. So when you're building the Mod4 project, try to add authentication. Why? Because even though it's not needed, it's going to be really good practice if you, in your Mod5 project, you want to be able to authenticate users, which many of you will want to. So it's a good time to practice. Any questions before we go? Pretty much. We're going to be using tokens. So we're not going to be storing a username like this anymore. Because what we've seen now, though, is quite useful. So let's take a very, very, very quick journey into what we can do, right? So we started with just a client with no logic at all, just 2 routes in there. We ended up having an API. We can sign in. We can validate, right? We wrote a whole backend that can do that. The backend works because we have cores and we have bcrypt. So bcrypt, what it can do is it can store a hash now instead of storing passwords, so we're never really storing passwords. The only thing we had to do is typical Rails magic, right? Just to hash secure password. Everything works. Cool. And we now have access to our app, and we can take them to the inventory. We can route, them depending whether they have a valid user or not, and we can even keep track of whether they're still signed in when they refresh, and somebody cannot come in and type in some random username and get in. They can if they type a valid username. Right? So maybe let's do that very, very quickly if you don't mind. I'm going to go here. I'm going to open a new tab, and I'm going to say, I'm going to open the console. I need to cd into my server first. And I'm going to create a new username, and it's going to be there you go. That's your hash. So now if I do whatever and I try to refresh the page, it's not going to work. But if I do Ollie, or Ollie, now I actually signed into your account. I can check that Ollie is a valid account. So yeah, we're not going to eventually store username. We're going to make it harder, and we're going to be storing tokens. But hopefully you can see how this is building up to having a secure way of checking whether a user is there or not. Anyone else? Off we go.